Hi everybody, my name's Kay. You're watching Amidst the Gray, and today I want to talk about Cledons in a VR to Christa from Crochet Witch Tarot and her tag, How I Divine. Let's do it. I am finally starting to get my energy back a little bit. I was sick for a lot of January toward the beginning of the month, and that flu got better, but then I started having a case of winter allergies. I'm hypothesizing mainly from mold. We've had a very wet winter. It's been very humid, and it's also been cold, and that is a perfect breeding ground. Perfect conditions for mold. And so I think I'm having a stronger reaction to mold this year than I typically do. You can hear it in my voice, maybe a little bit. But my energy is getting better. I didn't have any really for a few weeks, but I'm kind of starting to get my game back, I think, a little, and I don't feel quite so stagnant. I had been thinking about a way to talk about Cledons as another way of how I do divination. And I actually had a couple of videos in mind for other ways besides cards in which I engage with to practice divination. And then I saw Christa's tag, this How I Divine tag, and I thought that was absolutely perfect to kind of tie this in with what I had in mind. So, what is a Cledon? Honestly, I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that right, because there's not a lot of information, auditory information about this topic, and there's really not even a lot in print either. But I think it's Cledon, and so that's how I'm going to pronounce it. Using Cledons for divination is also known as Cledonism or Cledonomancy, if that's how it's pronounced. I'm honestly not sure. The basic, I guess, sort of agreed upon definition for what Cledonomancy is a type of divination based on chance encounters or events, and also by words occasionally uttered. Oh, that's kind of a wonky definition to me, but we're gonna go with it because it does essentially sum up what it is. Cledonomancy, I feel, can also kind of be paired a little bit with chiromancy. Chiromancy is a term that was coined by Robert Moss. The name escaped me for a minute. Robert Moss. He wrote a book. I'll insert a photo of it here. I believe it's called Sidewalk Oracles, or something to that effect. It has sidewalk in the title. And essentially, according to Moss, his term chiromancy refers to divination by synchronicity. However synchronicity looks for you and however you experience it. Cledonomancy is similar in that you are interpreting your answer or insight based on a sign that you might receive. I would say the main difference is that Cledonomancy is primarily engaged in by listening. I mean, you might see something like on a billboard or a sign, like a physical sign that might click with a question or a query that you might have. But in most cases, I think it mainly refers to listening. In the time of the ancient Greeks, the way this would work is the querent would go to the temple, whatever temple was in their area. They would enter the temple. They would whisper their query into the ear of a sacred statue in that temple. And once they were done, they would cover their ears, walk out of the temple, leave the temple, and when they were off of temple grounds, they would uncover their ears, and the first thing they heard would somehow be an answer or an insight to their question. I don't exactly do it that way, because oftentimes I will put a question like out into the universe, and I will ask specifically for a Cledon, and I'll put that energy out there. And sometimes in my experience, I won't receive an answer that makes sense to me until maybe a day or two or longer later. I was thinking back regarding my divination practice, and I'm pretty sure that this form of divination is the one that I have used the longest. I remember being very young, like younger than a preteen, but like particularly during my preteen and teenage years, I would listen for signs, and I would think a question in my head, and then I would forget about it, kind of like how the whole manifestation thing works. You think of something, you forget about it, and then something happens and it clicks with you and you're like, oh. So yeah, my divination practice essentially began with Cledons, Cledonomancy, Cledonism, however you prefer to say it. I tend to say working with Cledons because Cledonomancy is kind of a mouthful. So a question I've seen posed in forums regarding this topic is, how do you know if what you receive is a coincidence or a sign or a Cledon? And my answer to this is, I think it's like any other form of divination, where you engage with tarot cards, or you engage with runes, or you engage with the Ogham, or dominoes, or numerology, or you watch the flight patterns of birds. Whatever you use, whenever you get that feeling that just it's like a claircognizance. It's a knowing. It's something that settles inside of you like a really, really fine meal that agrees with your system. You finish the meal, you sit back, and you feel completely nourished, or you feel satisfied or content. There's just a feeling of well-being, even if the answer is not a pleasant one. There's still a sense of feeling settled, whether it's positive or negative. This is my personal experience. I'd be interested to know who else kind of engages with this divination and maybe how it works for them. But in my experience, it's a very clear knowing within the self that is the answer that you are seeking. Cledons have appeared for me visually before, but in my experience, the most profound examples have been auditory. It has been, for me, the words occasionally uttered, just things that I hear in crowds, or on the radio, or in a video, or in a podcast, or any time I'm engaging with something auditory. For me, that has been the single most powerful delivery of Cledons in my personal experience. The most profound example I think I can give is when I was pregnant with my son. I was in my early 3rd trimester, so like my 6th month, and I was narrowing names down. I wasn't 100% certain that he was a boy, but because the ultrasounds were always sort of inconclusive, but my OB was pretty confident, and internally I was confident as well. And so I kind of steered away from girls' names and started looking at boys' names a little bit, or like unisex names, a little bit more closely. And I had a few narrowed down, and then eventually I whittled it down to 2. The name I chose and another name. One of the name I did not choose was a lot more common than the name I did choose. My son's name it's not obscure, but it's not common either. And so definitely not as common as the other option. And I kind of just put out in the ether, what would be the best name for my child. And I knew I wasn't really going to make the final choice until I saw him like outside of my body, because I knew that would kind of affirm it for me. But kind of before that, I was really kind of wanting to maybe dial something in. And so I kind of asked that question. And that very same day, I took myself out to a favorite coffee house that in the area I was living in at the time. I allowed myself a very small coffee, very small, once a week, in the latter part of my pregnancy, because my craving for coffee in my second and third trimester it was so strong. And my first, not at all, but my second and third, I wanted coffee all the time. But all that caffeine is not good for the pregnancy. But my OB was like, you can have something small, but just don't overdo it. So I took that to heart, and I take myself out for coffee once a week. And when it was my turn up at the register, I ordered, I paid, and it was one of those where it was a pretty quick kind of turnaround sort of place. So you just kind of wait where you are, and they handcraft your drink and they give it to you. So the barista, not the one who rang me up, but the other one that was there, they were working on making my drink, and I was just waiting, thinking about really nothing in particular. And the one barista who was working behind the counter that didn't ring me up, the other one, she mentioned how her brother, with the same name that I chose, how he was coming home from military service. He was on a break. My brother, insert name here, is coming home this weekend. And my jaw dropped to the floor, because I had tried to remember any other time randomly when I had heard that name in public, like in my lifetime, and I really couldn't pinpoint one down. That name was said, and it was a clear settling in my body. That was my answer. And then the next day, I read that name in a local newspaper. Just randomly, it was a student from a local high school, if I remember correctly, who was receiving an award. And there was that name in the paper. So I heard it the day before, the day I kind of put my query out there, and I read it in print the next day. And that was it. and he came out, he was born, and he was definitely, that was the name that suited him. And that's the name I chose. And to this day, that is still one of the most profound divinatory experiences I have ever had. And the great thing about it was I didn't go through this big, like, elaborate ritual, to ask my question. It was just a casual contemplation. It was just, I kind of let my daydreaming, that daydreaming aspect of my brain sort of take over, where you're very relaxed. It's like that kind of pre-meditative state. I can't remember where on the spectrum of waves that falls, but you're very relaxed. You're extremely relaxed. And I could just kind of let myself go there. And then I let it go. And I didn't really think about it consciously at all until I heard the name being uttered. And then it was, that was it. And it was powerful. It was a very powerful experience. This type of divination is one that does not require any external tools. The only things you need are your own senses. The entire month of January, and even before that, beginning of Capricorn season, this whole winter season so far has been it's been a very yin time for me. My energy's been low. Things have been a little bit more quiet. And I found myself feeling that need to just listen to my environment and pick up what was happening around me. I just felt like I needed to be as receptive as I possibly could. And I'm kind of still in that energy, if I'm honest. But my card that I drew for Aquarius season is kind of pulling me out of that. And I'll talk about that when I talk about my seasonal journal for Aquarius season. But that energy that's a little bit more yang, that's showing up for me a little bit now after I got so much yin energy during the first part of winter. In my year ahead reading part 2, where I talked about my lessons from Saturn, I was just coming back out of having the flu. I was recovering. I talked about how I felt Saturn was giving me some lessons. And that was also the first day of the third decan of Capricorn. And so I drew an advice card because I've been drawing one for every decan, and it's a great practice and I'm loving it. And the card that I drew in that video, I brought it with me for the sake of this video, was the Listen card. This is the Wisdom of Hafiz Oracle. So I was really feeling pulled into that receptive, more yin energy. And I was thinking about Cledons and how that process of divination, how powerful it has been for me in the past. And then I drew the Listen card. And this was a Cledon in itself, that I needed to visit this form of divination a little bit more deeply. And I have spent the latter half of Capricorn season and this part of Aquarius season really engaging with listening to my environment, observing my environment, just putting questions or thoughts into the ether and seeing what shows up for me. And it's been a really good reminder of how powerful and how simple divination can be. Divination does not have to be this complicated thing. It certainly can be, particularly if you feel drawn to engage in ritual or do something a little more elaborate or make it a very extended reading or whatever you're doing, just a little bit more drawn out and extended. I engage in that when I feel called to do so, and that can be a really beautiful thing. But sometimes engaging in simple practices can be as powerful as engaging in more elaborate, ritualistic ones. I'll give you another example, actually. It was a very recent one that happened. If something happens, say I'll give you my example. I was with a person that I've worked with for over almost a decade. We know each other pretty well. We were having a conversation, and that was right before we were going home. But before that, when I was still in my room, I was by myself, I had been thinking about something in my personal life that had, it wasn't nagging at me, but it was just kind of wearing on me a little bit, as far as, this is a thing that's happening. I want to deal with this as best I can in a way that is beneficial for as many people as possible who are involved. And I was just like, okay, how can I do that? And it was casual. It was a casual thing. Just kind of a low-key daydreamy kind of energy. I packed up my bag. I walked out, and I didn't even see my colleague coming down the hall, but he kind of called after me, and I turned around and we just started talking a little bit. And we walked together out the door, and the words, "Step back and let it happen," came out of his mouth. And here's why I knew that was a Cledon. That is not characteristic of something he would say. It was odd. It was odd in relation to the context and the person that it came from. It wasn't something that I would anticipate that he would say, particularly within the context of the conversation we were having. But I knew that wasn't a part of that conversation. That was a Cledon for me. And I just kind of gave a little internal smile, and I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what I need to do. And he didn't miss a beat. He said it, and then he moved on to something else, and I was just like, that was a Cledon. That's how that works, And if you happen to be in a conversation with someone and you receive something like that, if it's very uncharacteristic behavior for that person, that is meant for you. So just if you engage with this type of divination, or you want to maybe try it, pay attention to those people and those events and the things that they say, or things that you witness visually that are just extremely odd or unusual or atypical for that particular circumstance. I think that's all I have to say about Cledons. I love this tag, this How I Divine tag. I actually have a couple more that I want to do for various other types of divination that I don't engage with as often. But I still feel the need to use them every once in a while, because depending on the question or the nature of the context, I feel that system might lend itself better than maybe tarot. I'm filming this video on Sunday, the 22nd of January. This is going to be one of, I think, 3 videos that are going to come out relatively close together in the following week. This one might actually come out on Sunday evening. I'm not sure yet. It'll depend on what I have going on, but I have 4 other videos that are like partially filmed and one that's completely filmed, but I just have to put it together. So more content will be coming from me in the next week and the week after as well. I have a lot of stuff that's like nearly there, but not quite. And it's a lot of just putting the pieces together. I'm also going to provide a link to a blog post, if it's still up. I'm thinking it is, that Colette Baron Reed did about the subject of Cledons, whether you like her or loathe her. The post that she did about this topic is, I think, a rather good one. And so I will link that. And I think she might have done a video on it as well. And I'll try to find both. And if I can't find both, hopefully I can find one and link that for you. So I thought it was pretty well done. And so I just want to include that in here. Okay, until my next video, take care and be well.